Great. So I'll go to the next screen. So I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather today. For me, that's lands of the Turrbal people. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the first peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. So I'll quickly run through the agenda for today. Usual business, we'll go through usual business, which we always go through, the approval of minutes. We'll look at actions and updates and news, and then we'll have a walkthrough of the draft AU Patient Summary IG, which is the first draft based on the outcomes of the Scoping Patient Summary workshop last December. And then we'll talk about the Adelaide face-to-face TDG and the workshop agenda. So let's move on to usual business. As per normal, we'll look to approve the patient summary minutes for the last TDG on the 24th of January. Last I checked, we had all the necessary parts in the Confluence page, the agenda, the minutes, and the recording. Does anyone need more time to review these minutes before we look to approve them? Okay, hearing none. Would anyone like to motion to approve the minutes for the 24th of January?
Danielle, I'm happy to motion.
Thank you, Danielle. Would anyone like to second?
I'll second, Steve Swinsberg.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. So let me find the poll and I'll launch this poll. Great. So please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you didn't attend the last meeting, feel free to click abstain. Also, if you're on a call and don't have the option to select one of these buttons, just say your name, your vote, and we'll just add it to the tally.
Then Danielle, +1 affirmative.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 76%. I'll just give that a few more moments and I'll count down in a second. Okay, we have 80%. So I might count down. 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I'll share those results. Okay, so based on that, plus Danielle, we have 16 affirmative, we have 0 negative, and we have 6 abstain. So that motion passes. Those minutes are approved. I'll share the results. Okay, and for updates, AU Base 5 is released and is published and available. I think that was about 3 weeks ago. So anyone who is interested in the latest release of Base, you can have a look at that. And AU Core 1.0 has also been officially published, which is a major milestone. So feel free to look at that. So moving on to AU Core and patient summary workshops, just a quick reminder, there is a face-to-face event coming up in February, including a CDG and TDG workshops on the 19th and 20th of February in Adelaide. If you're registered with Spark, you should have received an email with details on the event and how to get tickets. If you haven't received it and would like to attend, there's a QR code on the screen, bottom right, that will take you to the ticketing page. This event will include workshops supporting AU Core R2 and Patient Summary R1. If you have any questions, you can email spark@csiro.com.au. I'll drop the email in the chat soon. Feel free to reach out and someone will get back to you. I think as of yesterday, there was 19 tickets left. There might be less now, so get in fast if you have not already. And the Trans-Tasman Symposium and HL7 Connectathon. This is a 3-day event in Sydney from the 18th through to the 20th. The symposium being on the 18th and the Connectathon on the Wednesday and Thursday, 19th and 20th of March. This is sold out, I believe, but you can go on a wait list at events@hl7.com.au and state which event you'd like to attend, symposium or Connectathon. And I think at that same address, you can also cancel your tickets if you can no longer attend as well. So given that, I think, oops, I think I clicked off of it. So I think we're handing over to Dushi now to go through a walkthrough of the patient summary IG draft. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, we definitely intended to, but Dusha can't make it. So you're going to be stuck with me. So I'll start sharing my screen then. And if you could admit people while I'm doing that, Landon, that would be great.
Sure. Perfect.
Okay, before I do that, I'm just going to get this ready and put it in the chat, like the location to the draft IG. So this is a moving target. This is being built out now. Probably send out some comms when it's fully done. One of the reasons it's still a moving target is there's a few tooling things. And also, sorry, accidentally put myself on mute there. And also, AU Core is responding to our requests for some core profiles around related person and medication statement. And they did related person yesterday, so that means that that can kind of be factored into what we're having a look at. And they're working through medication statement through February and into March. So we'll kind of announce what that's looking like in this call so we can stay up to date and put in any feedback if we want to. There's going to be a mix of what I think I'm going to do today, which is just give a little bit of a tour, but largely around navigation and the kind of content. And then I want to talk about some managing of relationships and complexity. We've agreed on the profile design principles to be compliant to AU Core and IPS. And we sit in a broader Australian context, international context, and there are ways we need to look at in producing the implementation guide on how to manage that and how to manage our links into other specifications. And I'll kind of walk through some of that today. And it's going to be an ongoing conversation about how that will work. And as our work evolves on localizing patient summary and where we may want to specify additional requirements, I think that we may, I guess, change our approach over time based on testing and also based on how usable what we're doing is for human readers or other particular kind of downstream uses of the specification. So first off, I'll just start homepage, and this is just a walkthrough. So if you've got any questions, you can post them in the chat at any time. This isn't going to be the only time we talk about what's in the IG and what might we want to put in the IG and how is it looking. That's going to be an ongoing conversation. I think there's also some interest in having maybe some connectathon breakouts around IGs or having some discussions around particular parts of them for those people who are authoring IGs for their own systems, or if you're looking after like a jurisdictional area and how that might need to relate to patient summary and or AU core, so that we make sure that the way we're specifying the rules we agreed to is usable for the majority of our ecosystem. It's actually going to be really interesting over the next kind of few months to a year. That's probably enough waffle. Let's have a look at the IG. So this is what one looks like. It looks pretty similar to all the others that are in HL7 AU. We have up the top is the top level menu bar. There's also this table of contents, which is more like a total page tree, where you can see all the different pages that are in the IG. A lot of this is empty, so this is just stubbed in at the moment. We've got, our 3 use cases, so all that's in the IG until we have some further agreements and discussion on it is just a TBD. So these are placeholders currently, but this content will live in the IG at some point. So from the homepage, we've got a few kind of standard sections, just a what is it, a little bit on project background, and we've all kind of seen this diagram earlier on when we started this call. There's a dependencies table. Our dependencies for patient summary are a mix of both what we agreed that we would be built off R4, and also talking about, because this is a current build, so we're pointing to the current of things. So we're pointing to the current IPS, which is the very latest that they're working through and resolving, that they'll end up publishing is 200. And for AU Core, we're pointing at the latest, and that will allow us to pick up related person, for example, when it's added next week. And we'll all sort of evolve together over the life of this. And then there's a standard how to read section, which gives a little bit of an annotation about each of the top level and next level pages. That's all that's in the homepage at the moment. That may change over time if there are things that, as we go through use cases and look at our particular interactions, or whether there's anything further around guidance, we may add additional content. Conformance has a largely stubbed in page for general requirements. At this point, we've got a lot of TBD here, and we're going to be talking about what does conforming to patient summary mean. And I expect that to kind of really be coming in after the workshop as we sort of balance discussing the use cases and how we approach it, along with some conformance aspects and some modeling aspects. So I think they'll be at most of our calls, we're going to be discussing those 3 things fairly regularly. What isn't TBD is this is starting to be built out. When we've stated we are going to be compliant to AU Core and compliant to AU Patient Summary, we also need to answer what that means for things like missing data, for things like mandatory data, and what does it mean for must support. So there's some analysis that Heath is doing to analyze IPS's set of conformance requirements, and he's going to come back to this group with a report on what that looks like, where we think there might need to be clarifications or any particular concerns or conflicting content, and we'll have a look through that in terms of next steps. At the moment, this just points to AU Core section on missing data and suppressed data. In terms of guidance, this is again just a stubbed in page. This is TBD as we evolve and agree on particular aspects where we don't want to mandate, but we actually want to provide particular guidance on something that we think is useful or is actually maybe a recommended way to do things. We'll start to build this content out. And there's also a number of just templated pages for other things. There's a sex and gender page, which you will see one of these in all the HL7A UIGs. They all look kind of the same, where they talk about how the sex and gender and related concepts are incorporated into the particular implementation guide here. So you'll find this page similarly in AU Base, in AU Core, and now we've got it in Patient Summary. We will have a page that talks about how we map into and relate to AUCDI. The patient summary component of AUCDI, I think, has just closed its review feedback time. So that is being undertaken through the clinical design group, and we will get a formal, I think, release of that soonish. And we'll also be talking about how that relates into what is present in the FHIR artifacts in patient summary, and the results of that will end up coming into this page when we have made those agreements. Other things you can find. We always like to talk about relationship with other IGs. This is just a template page at the moment, and it doesn't have anything further in it. You'll see this content also in base and core and e-requesting. I'm not going to walk through it in detail at this point. Just note that that's there. We have an AU variance statement. This is present in all HL7 AU FHIR IGs. The purpose of the variance statement is to make clear whether or not this particular implementation guide complies with the requirements of AU Base and complies with the requirements of AU Core. So that's really what ends up getting stated here. So at the moment, based on our agreement, if we want to be both IPS and AU Core compliant, we are going to be fully compliant to Base and Core. There are no rules in IPS that conflict with Base or Core that I'm aware of. So that will look like this. You might also notice down here that there is these additional profiles, which is a recommended bit of content to include on this page to state what extra things are you doing in your IG where there hasn't been a profile in base. And I see Stephen has put in a chat, and I'll clarify that shortly. I will say there are not two URLs to the patient summary IG. There are two separate IGs, and one is a testing space. And that's the draft one, Stephen.
Thank you. I just look at it and I find that for people who are less informed might be a bit confusing.
Yep. We can see if we can find a testing watermark to have on this page, have on the testing space.
And that will be helpful.
Yep. Great. I think, Brett, we've done one in the past for some other IGs in HL7. All right,
yep,
cool.
I think that's a really good idea for all the draft specs, actually. Good.
Perfect. So I'll catch up with you maybe later this afternoon, maybe early next week to stick the watermark on this.
Great, cool.
Alrighty.
It's interesting. This one's not actually a draft, not so much a draft spec as a draft space or a testing space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the variance statement page. There's the comparison. So this one, at the moment, we're trying to update this with saying, look, what's our comparison to IPS and AU Core? And you'd better expect all the green ticks, of course, because we've said we're going to be green tick. We're going to be compliant with both. And it's also currently got in it an international patient access. I want to come back to you guys a bit later about things that we might find useful to compare against and discuss internally. There's a whole number of other nationalised specifications, including obviously New Zealand. But whether or not we think that that's actually really useful to try to maintain as part of the public-facing IG, that might it might be more of an internal guide if that's something that we like. And there's a empty kind of future of patient summary. That's waiting for us to decide that something really is important and we'd like to bring people's attention to it, that we'd like some feedback on it, but that we're not going to be doing in the short term. But that's currently empty. Otherwise, this page holds what all the others do for HL7AU. So there's a general description on the target release timeframes. As we get closer to R1, this will change what is presented in here and we'll keep up to date the image. This just gives people this vague idea of where things are tracking towards. This is the same slide that we've been looking at in a couple of meetings around what the intended goal is for when we do ballot for comment versus when we do ballot for working standard and when we publish. Okay, so that covers guidance and use cases. Let's move on to security and privacy, which unsurprisingly is a big TBD. We will need to consider and make clear an assertion of what the security and privacy considerations are that are relevant. Every HL7AU IG needs to do that. In fact, every HL7 IG needs to do that. And this is waiting for us to have that discussion and then start to evolve the page in line with whatever agreements we get to. I'm going to skip to the other bit that is just very muchly a template. There's a downloads page. This is the same as in all the other IGs. This lists all the things that you can get a copy of. So you can take an offline copy of this entire implementation guide. They get to be relatively large sized. So if you download that, then you'll get all of the HTML pages, all of the profile structures, all the images, everything will be there in a zip. There's also the package file, both for R4 and R4B. These are automatically generated through IG Publisher and are really what you want to be looking at and referencing if you're doing anything interesting in terms of tooling, whether that's loading things on standards or trying to auto-generate, I don't know, maybe something on from that like test suites or some other kind of comparison. There'll be this available for examples. We don't have an example yet in this IG, so I don't know what that does. I wonder if that's empty. All right, sorry, I'll have a look at that offline. It's not relevant. Okay, this is as part of publication, IG Publisher, the tool chain that we use, will automatically generate some additional files and views. And one of those is a consolidated CSV file and a consolidated Excel file that show you in a table some profile information and looking at elements across multiple profiles. It's quite useful, but it can be really hard to read and understand and consider about versioning and non-version and what's going on. But if you've got any questions about that, I think you can always raise them in chat.phir.org. And lastly, we have the implementation guide resource itself. So that's the actual IG file for this. So it's the implementation guide resource that defines this. And look, there's a TBD there because I've not gotten to that yet. We're in progress building this out. That's some of the template things, but let's get to the actual content. And that is in the FHIR artifacts. So at the moment, there are 3 parts of the dropdown. This artifact summary is, again, the kind of thing you're going to see everywhere. You'll see it in base, you'll see it in core, you'll see it, I think, in e-requesting. And that is a full list of all the different FHIR structures in this IG, which at the moment are only resource profiles. As we move on, you might see something like, I'll just bring up AU base. and you see artifact summary, you then get things around search parameters and data type profiles and extensions and value sets and example instances. So this will evolve over time and is your one-stop shop to see every structure that is authored in this IG. And it basically just is an automatically generated rendering of the definition of each of the structures. What we typically look at is the profiles and extensions page. So this has the list of profiles that have been defined for the IG. And then at the extensions, we see down here, this will show you, depending on what your implementation guide does, this should show you both what is defined in this implementation guide. So if we define any custom extensions for that only live inside the Australian Patient Summary IG, they would be listed here. But what it also does is list all the extensions that are marked as must support in profiles. So where something is defined either as an international FHIR extension that we have said needs to be supported, or if there's an Australian extension, which is usually in base. So at the moment, with our statement of saying we want to be compliant to IPS and we want to be compliant to core, there are
Thank you.
3 extensions that are must support in patient summary, and they are Indigenous status, they are individual pronouns, and they are individual gender identity, and they're all picked up in AU Patient Summary Patient, and that is picked up because we are saying we will be compliant to AU Core Patient, and these are must support in AU Core Patient. So that's what is in this section, and that will evolve as we make decisions. All right, so let's talk about profiles then a bit more. There's 2 sections. One is what have we defined, but then similarly with extensions, there are others that are target of a must support element. So there are many cases where, let's say, composition author, you can have a related person, and at the moment that's actually going off to AU base related person. So we've included, for ease of reference for people, where there is a profile that is called out in one of ours, so that you, I hopefully aren't surprised by the fact that this is relevant. And that's a mix of both IPS, AU Core, and currently AU base, but that'll go away next week because AU Core related person should be included in the current draft of AU Core next week, I think. So that's what you see on this page. Now that's an overall kind of level of navigation. I'm going to do a very brief bit on how to read a profile page, noting that this is still being built out. And then we'll talk about the actual profiling, where it's currently at and why, and how we're going to work through things. But how am I doing for time? I'm conscious that this isn't only about the FHIR IG walkthrough today.
I have a question about the other profiles used.
Yeah.
Is that list generated automatically by the publisher just by it looking for things with a must support?
No, it can't with the complexity of using impose profile or those things.
Right. Okay. So
yeah.
that's manually maintained and updated.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Or rather, it's not that it theoretically couldn't, but it's not trivial. It is trivial for some specifications that only use profiling techniques that mean that you get everything inside the snapshot. But if you have to dive into other IGs and then kind of try and resolve that, then it becomes a degree of difficulty higher.
Yep. The tooling doesn't support it, and it's going to be really hard to do. So don't hold your breath for the tooling to support it. And until then, it's all manual.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we've talked about it at various tooling things, and I know that Lloyd and a few other people have talked about it, and it's how useful this is and where and how would we want to do that. And so I think it's something that is still being kind of considered, how this could easily happen. And so we might end up seeing it, in which case, great, I can stop having this manual list and just use whatever comes out automatically.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions or anything people want to look at before let's open maybe patient summary, allergy, and tolerance, and we'll just look at a profile, and then I'm going to talk about complexity, because there's some new stuff, I think, for people that won't have seen it before. All right, let's have a look. So this is the same kind of template. So just in general, there's content here. You'll see formal views of profile content, which will give you a differential table, which shows you essentially what your local rules are. It'll give you key elements, which will show you the rules for everything that is flagged with must support. It'll also bring in all the normative parts relating to those elements that are must support, and anything with a modifier on it. So this is really where you want to go to see the full calculated list of rules for the items of relevance. And then in the snapshot table, it expands the whole thing for all the elements then that this profile is aware of. So it's the full inheritance stack right back to the FHIR standard through AU base and into this. And it shows a fully calculated set of rules. And so this can be really useful for some purposes, but generally you don't want to see it. And then personally, I don't really use the statistics and references, but it gives you things like there's 2 mandatory elements and 10 must support elements. So this can be kind of useful to get a high level summary of saying that, hey, this is where these things are referenced. What we will probably see at the bottom of the table, if we put any search content in this, we will see something below this, but it's not going to now. There's also missing kind of other templates on informative content that needs to be added in. So that's going to happen over the next week or two. Now I'm going to skip out of this view and come back to the...
So can I ask a quick question? I can't find my hands up because I'm a presenter. At a glance, is there an easy way to differentiate the differences between AU Core and these implementations, like if there were one? Because as an implementer, you'd want to like do a compare. What's different between this allergy and tolerance and the base AU Core?
So that's one of the things we're going to talk about on what our modeling choices let us do. So if we wanted to do that, so the differential table always shows you your local. So it's the set of rules on top of your base definition. And at the moment, this base definition is AU base. If this base definition was AU core, the differential table would only show you the difference between the two. And I think that's the better approach.
Yeah.
Normatively equivalent, but there's a few options. Let me run through them real quick. How long do I have left, Landon?
You had an hour, so I think you have 25 minutes, but that includes all the slides as well.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll give it a go. So, okay, profiling content. Just quick refresh. This is what we're including. That was our agreed focus. And so this is what it looks like in terms of profiles. We'll have a bundle profile, a composition, a patient, practitioner role, practitioner, organization, related person. And there'll be condition and allergy intolerance and medications, immunization. And then we bring in a couple of things by reference, which are encounter and procedure. So this is basically our target profile set. But let's talk about profiling. So in the end, the agreement is that when you apply the profile, and a profile is really just a named set of rules, it will be compliant to IPS and AU Core. And we agreed that what that means is when you validate against, I've got something blocking my screen. So when you validate your resource instance, like a particular patient instance or an allergy intolerance instance, against our profile, it's essentially it would validate against both IPS and AU Core. That we will validate reference elements against our patient summary profiles, and that where there's a choice for terminology bindings, like if AU Core has a preferred supported value set and IPS has a preferred supported value set, we are starting with the AU Core set as the localized Australian requirements. And so what we want to do is we want to have a profile. So we want AU patient summary allergy intolerance to essentially reflect this. And that when you validate that an allergy intolerance subject, so it goes off to a patient, is and still valid against both AU Core and IPS. So we need to build out a set of profile rules that do that. And it gets a bit complex. So this is just a perspective of some of the wider context that when we want to look at managing relationships between different specifications. So yes, there's AU patient summary, and we want to have this direct compliant relationship with IPS and Core. But Core is built on base. Core is a set of minimum requirements on top of base. And it also pays attention to around things like IPA and gender harmony, and obviously AUCDI and US Core. And in the background, of course, there's the FHIR standard. There's more things here, but it is a sort of a complex web of managed rules. And there's a few things offered in FHIR on how do you have your direct relationship with these things. It's probably in the wrong order, but the first thing we're calling base definition. So that's derive, which is what you would typically see and was what you were talking about, Landon. So if we went to AU Core or e-requesting, which both derive off AU base, what you see in this table are all the rules on top of the base, which itself derives from the FHIR standard. And this would suddenly bring out, see where we've got clinical status there? And we can see that there's a cardinality. We can see, oh, that's the data type codable concept. And we can see obligations. And those are the local rules. But what we inherit when we come down is, in fact, there's a terminology binding there. And we've inherited that through derivation rather than applying it locally. The derivation is really, really powerful. And where you have a single line, a single stack, that's fairly easy. But once we're doing what we're doing, and we care about IPS and AU Core, then derivation can't be the sole answer. I do think it should form one of our answers. And I like what you were talking about, Landon, of saying, if we derive from Core and then we say, here are the additional rules you need when you're using Core in the context of a patient summary. And those additional rules are from IPS. And there's two ways to do the additional rules. One is informal alignment. That's people, basically. So that's us getting together in a room and going, we agree this thing is mandatory, and then a human author goes and writes it down. So that's AU Core is authored through that process of making agreements on top of on top of base, but making agreements and editing that. We could treat our alignment with IPS like that. That's what Canada essentially has done. They don't have a programmatic link. They have said that they are aligned with IPS, but that has been done through discussion and agreement, and then is directly authored as a set of local rules. You could use this new thing called impose profile. Out of interest, how many people on the line have heard of impose profile? One. All right, good stuff. I think that tells us some of where we need to go. No, two. All right. So this is fairly new. The discussions around the localization and the need to support local requirements within the context of an international standard is not new. You know, we've been doing this for quite a while. And with the further capabilities that have been introduced through international patient access and international patient summary, that kind of needs really started to come filter up in the priority list internationally and through tooling to say, well, we don't just want to always have to rely on people who've read it and are manually maintaining this. We want a way to actually say that thing over there. And so they've created an extension called Impose Profile. And Impose Profile is where we would say one of our rules is that we impose the rules of IPS. So if we took that example of allergy intolerance, we would say that one of the rules in our patient summary allergy intolerance profile is to impose the IPS allergy intolerance profile. And that has some implications on what you see visually. It doesn't bring in all the rules. So you wouldn't see them like in this, when you break it down into key elements and snapshot. It's a pointer to a managed rule set. And it says those ones that are managed over there, that's what I mean. There's some positives and negatives to that. I think it has a lot of positives. One of the negatives, of course, is if we were to read our specification with human eyes, you wouldn't see that codable concept IPS data type is applied, because that would all be inside that profile. You wouldn't see that there's a must support here, because that's over in the IPS. And you wouldn't see that this is mandatory. Obviously, this is not a problem for machine processing. In terms of validation, the tooling and tool chain behind that, the FHIR validator, can read and apply impose. But it does present a degree of complexity for humans to understand how complex your rules are and to do some of that calculation of where are the unique rules. And that's impose. And then we have complies with, which is a formal relationship, but it is an assertion. So it says, whatever I've done, and maybe we just hand wrote patient summary. We didn't even inherit from anything. We just wrote it. We could state that we comply with IPS or comply with AU Core, and it's purely an assertion. It doesn't actually programmatically apply a check. So FHIR validator won't go actually check that something is compliant with it. And I'll just go, oh, look, I already did that. Let me show you what this looks like. So if we used impose, and this might be what this looks like if we went down this pathway. If we said we want, I'll start on the right, AU patient summary patient, we derive from AU core patient, and we could use the extension impose profile to impose those additional rules over here. And I did put in composition, but that's actually not quite right, because at this stage, AU Core isn't working on a composition, so that's not possible. And in our circumstance, we would instead derive from IPS composition, which I think is a great idea because of all the complexity that is being managed in IPS. We want to derive from that. And I think we don't want to just impose profile because it is such a complex set of rules that I think it is really important that we get to see it. And so we would derive from it. And then instead of having IPS's like composition dot subject going to IPS's patient, it would go to the AU patient summary patient, which ensures that both sets of rules are in there. And how this kind of looks like when we build out more of that tree I was showing you is that you suddenly go up and you have that inheritance stack for patient summary, which maintains that inheritance stack right from AU patient summary up through AU core patient, up through AU base patient, up into the FHIR standard. And we would impose patient IPS. This is a definite possibility. But it does kind of mean eyes-wise, you will need to go look at both of these. You need to look at two. You can't just look at one. So right now, there's a couple of tooling things that I'm working through with Graham while we try to explore this one. Chris?
I was just going to suggest, and I think you're already there, changing the tooling. If it's computable and it's just the eyes piece, then maybe the tooling needs to change to support it.
I think it's an ongoing discussion of how do you decide, like in that case where we go up to our principles, how does the tooling know that we prefer the AU core preferred one? So I think that there would be quite a degree of configuration complexity.
Yeah, okay, yep.
There's also the other one of what happens when you have a required binding here and a required binding here, and they only overlap in a certain way, right? So then how do you represent in a single profile what that actual interlace is? And I think that's where we kind of try to look at, well, is it still acceptable in that case to leave that up to humans to work it out by still using imposed profile, and they have to work out that, noting, of course, the tooling will still validate. So you'll get the errors if you're doing it wrong and validating. But you might not be aware that one of the required codes is different in these sets. And maybe that is, depending on the nature of it, enough justification that we actually want to do the informal alignment, and we actually want to create a value set that represents that so people can go look at it. I'm not necessarily in favor of that idea, but it's kind of the implications I think we need to discuss. Okay, so mostly I think the big difference, I think I've already talked about the big differences. That's the complies with. There would be more manual intervention here with us doing that work to essentially make that decision tree, Chris, on working out and agreeing, and us explicitly agreeing that that's actually the agreed set. And then you would only need to look at this one.
Yeah,
that would be the source of truth. So right now, I have taken an authoring pathway. Oh yeah, Richard.
I think one thing that comes out here is that we want AU patient summary. We want its rules to follow the rules of core patient, and we want what for patient. So AU patient summary patient. We want it to follow the rules of core patient, a core FHIR patient. And we want it to follow the rules of the patient summary patient. And we also want to provide its own extra advice. And so things like, I prefer this value set over that value set is the extra advice that is a thing uniquely about AU patient summary patient. But the fact that that element has to then include values that are consistent with the two things that it is related to. That's sort of like the validation rule as opposed to the local rule of what I want to do. And so, yeah, one of the things we've got is not just what we inherit, but also what we adjust locally. And things like choosing one over the other is going to be very hard to pick up just by a inheritance or complies with type process, because it's a local rule, not a rule you're getting from one of your ancestors.
Mm. So I've got two things going on that we're going to finish with, because this is just the beginning of us looking at this. Of all the profiles in this list, and we now have a draft of everything but related person that's coming soon, I have taken the most human readable, least machine maintainable way, purely for us to run through and go, is this actually what we thought all the rules were when we put them together? They're all here, they're visible to us so we can see them all in one place and enable a human-centric conversation around design and confirmation. And also drag out, is there anything else? Did we really think we were going to get something else in here? Do we need to work on it? I think once we move past that, I think is when we should really be shifting then the profile design towards the more machine maintained side of things. The slight exception to that, and this is purely like this, and Graham and I'm going to catch up about this next week, is there's a current issue in the tooling. We want to inherit, or I would like to show what it looks like when we inherit from IPS composition as soon as possible, but there was a little tooling snafu which wasn't allowing swapping out references. So we're going to get that fixed, and then this will be updated. So that's what this looks like. It should actually be the full normative representation of both, and we are testing that, even though it's been authored by largely informal alignment. And one of the things that I'd like to draw people's attention to is this draft for testing. What we have got here, and I also want to have this looked at by other people who are like have to generate things, is looking at the different possible approaches and what it all looks like. So we've got the, like, if I derive from base and I manually apply these things and then I do this, what does it look like? Right down to the different way of saying, what if, let me find it. This is the one you were thinking about, Landon, I think. This derives from AU core and imposes IPS. That's what the differential looks like.
Yeah.
But if you look in key elements, you get all of the AU core rules. But you don't get any IPS rules because this one uses impose. So you've got to go look at the IPS to work that through. That's like one showing what does it look like in differential and key. There's another one about this of what if we just derived from base and used impose for both core and IPS, which sounds like a nightmare to try to read. And so these are all here, and I'm just going to, I think Stephen already dropped the link in the chat, but we're going to continue to try to test this out and also work with some other people around what are the implications of using different tooling options. And people are also welcome to contribute to this. And we might, again, look at breakouts or things like that to get through content. I'll just go, what is in here? We've picked one profile at the moment, which is medication request. And we did that because it's relatively complex, because we've got slicing and inheritance from base to test out the possible variations of how do I have a programmatic link between base, core, IPS, and our resulting profile that needs to sort of put all of that together for us. And so we've come up with a few ways. If I'm missing one, let me know. We'll put it in. And we've got some examples that are testing this. It needs to be written up a little better. We've got control examples, and then we've got these ones that their purpose, and you look at the QA.html, is to do that. If I just looking at the time, just do a quick go to the end. Where's QA.html? Aha! So I need a better automated generated test report to come in here, but the idea for profiling for positive cases is they all end up with the same result. So we're testing different combinations of derived versus imposed to say that when it gets validated, it comes up with the same result. But you can note here that it's information rather than warning or error. There's little differences here. And this one is glaringly green. And it's glaringly green because we tested out that, tested out a profile option, this one, which is just using the words complies with. And we're confirming that essentially the validator doesn't do anything. So it's a false statement of compliance. There's no rules in the profile that make it complied with. So we're testing out all of these kinds of things. I'm probably going to stop there because I feel like it might actually be way too much already information for people. Yep, Michael?
Sorry, to probably make it worse, but just wondering about the role of actors and AU patient summary, noting that the screen you showed before showed the inherited obligations from AU core.
Yep. Yeah, so at the moment, we're really only having profile discussions on IPS, and then we're about to go and talk about actors and obligations in relation to that and dig through what does compliance mean. IPS has some beginning statements around that, and how we deal with that will have the same thing. Does it get maintained informally? Does it come in through a programmatic relationship? Do we derive IPS actors from AU core actors? So that kind of will naturally carry on when we have the conformance, like what does it actually mean to support patient summary, and talk further about, do we want to formalize any of our responses to the technical use cases, or do we really want to only sit with guidance in R1? I think that will be one of the determiners of what you'll end up seeing in the structures.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether actors are potentially on the table or not, whether that's something that could live in AU patient summary. Like you said, it may not just be guidance, but it is something that could end up in there.
Yeah, absolutely, it could. And yeah, I think it's really how far we go in R1 versus the approach where I think we're all pretty confident getting to a set of agreements around the data, what data should be included, what can it look like, what's an acceptable set of data. But then we've got so many various use cases and so many people are interested in building things out that I don't know if it's actually the right time or safe for us to try to mandate or prescribe something around interactions rather than working through some possible approaches and us continuing to evolve that into the next release. I guess we'll know more after the February workshop, which is going to start that discussion around, okay, so great, now we've got data, let's talk about what we do with it.
Yep, that's good, thanks.
So I'll hand back to you, Landon. That's as far as I want to go this time. This won't be the end of the conversation. We'll come back on it, and I'll probably send out an announcement on chat.fire.org when I've worked through the tooling with Graham. We've got a first cut. But it is, okay, actually, it is normatively complete now. It's just a bit more human than I think makes sense for our first one, but it has been reviewed and it is the full set of normative rules that we agreed to by saying we're going to comply to patient summary and core. So you can go play with it now if you'd like.
One quick question. So if we were to pull down that package and validate against it, that will be validating the IG that you have against AU core, the patient summary IG and IPS. It would be doing all those validations.
No, the reason we did it this way for human readable is we don't have the strong programmatic relationship.
Okay,
so
the IG doesn't have that. Okay, gotcha. No, that's all right.
Yeah,
cool.
At the moment it's fully inside each profile snapshot. So it is validating against AU patient all the profiles and the rules defined inside each of the AU patient summary profile snapshots. It's not calling validation to another profile. And we've gotten there through a mix of inheritance, like deriving from base, and a mix of adding additional local rules into our content. So yeah, so what you will see is that that's what it's doing. Richard?
No, that helps. Thanks. Richard.
Found my unmute button. Does the validator currently enforce the impose extension?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely works through the tooling. That was what we were confirming. How does it behave with impose? How does it behave with complies within that testing space? And we can absolutely confirm it does indeed it calls validation on that profile. Yes.
Good, good. Theoretically, the validator, when validating the structure definition, could say this structure definition falsely claims to comply with that structure definition. And that's something it doesn't yet do. So that if that was the case, then you wouldn't get a fail on the examples, you'd get a fail on the structure definition, that the structure definition has made a claim that it doesn't meet.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons why the current build is failing. There's an extraneous kind of, or a false check going on with the IPS profiles, where it's saying you've declared you comply with IPS, but you're using your own profile, not IPS's. So I think it could be built into, and I think Graham's looking at that, building that into the profile authoring, so that when you introduce a complies with declaration, part of the QA checks for your structure definition are saying, well, do you really?
That would be really
great.
useful. Yeah, that would be really useful. It makes it makes it easy to test that your complies with does work when you're trying to simulate the information somewhere else. You could even do it transitorily. You could say, well, I want to comply with this 2-year-old version of this, and so I'll do a complies with, and I'll build it till it works, and then now I'm right, and then I can take that off and do something else.
Yeah, true.
Okay, great. I think we're on to the Adelaide face-to-face workshop discussion. Was Steve, were you going to share your screen and present, or would you like me to share my screen?
If you could share, that'd be great. And I'll just say next slide if you like.
Okay, perfect. I
Okay.
will share my screen.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of the prep for the Adelaide workshop, the C2G day. And actually, if you could go to the next slide, Landon. So we've come up with a number of topics for the day. The first couple are around medication exchange in AU Core and AU Patient Summary. So we're looking at the use cases that you might have for representing medications in both AU Core and Patient Summary. So when I say use cases, I mean things like clinician prescribed meds, over-the-counter or self-prescribed meds, meds that are prescribed elsewhere, any reviews that are happening and the outputs of those reviews, and even administration of medications. We're really interested in finding out how your systems represent those meds and potentially what FHIR resources you might be using or intending to be using. The next portion of the meds workshop is around the AU Patient Summary. So the medication section has a choice between the two resource types. And so we're looking at having a discussion maybe around how we might handle duplicates, how we might handle the concept of active meds or indicating meds that are current. And then potentially some of that might land in the IG. So yeah, we'll see where we end up there. And the second half of the workshop is around the exchange of patient summaries. So we're going to be looking at the referral consumer journey. So we spoke to a number of vendors over the past few weeks, and it emerged that the referral consumer journey was probably the one that was most likely to be implemented first, the workflow associated with that. And we're going to get onto that consumer journey in just a moment, but in terms of the workshop, so talking about the considerations and challenges for each step of that consumer journey, what we might need to solve those problems, and then moving on to a discussion around any interactions that we might see in terms of like getting patient summaries, searching for patient summaries, potentially updating patient summaries, and then again, guidance maybe to go in the Patient Summary IG. Just put your hand up if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next slide, please, Landon. Yep. Okay, so this is the consumer journey for the referral to specialists and allied health. If you dive into the details, it is actually quite complicated. So what we would like to do and get some agreement on this call is for the workshop, specifically for the workshop in February only, I'd like to narrow this down so that we can focus just on a couple of parts. I'd like to get 2 or 3 parts that we can really hone in on for the workshop so that we can start our discussion around, is it access? Is it updating? Is it retrieving? Anything along those lines. If you could go to the next slide, please. So at the last face-to-face in Melbourne, we had a Menti and we voted that generation, we prioritised that generation, view and retrieving the latest were the top 3 priorities, and updating was actually the lowest priority. So hopefully from that we can frame our focus on the consumer journey to be around those top 3 priorities. And so if we go to the next slide. Yes, great. Yep, that one. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through this consumer journey and just indicate some of the key points that I've extracted from here. Again, feel free just to raise your hand and I'll stop and answer any questions. So at step 1 here, we've got a referral being created. We potentially have 2 referrals being created because there is the language here says it sends electronic referrals. So that's up for discussion. But anyway, we have a referral being created, and reading into the details of it, it may or may not have a patient summary generated at the time. If it is generated, does it go along with the referral, or is it a request for information link that then someone can come back and retrieve that patient summary? These are just questions that we're probably going to go through on the day to figure out how the technical implementation or the solution for this might look like. The CFG, the consumer focus group, clinician focus group, have essentially delegated the TDG and the patient summary group to come up with the technical solutions for each of these steps. So that's what we're going to be looking at on the day. But I think the key point for that step 1 is that the patient summary is supplementary to the referral. Okay, step 2, the referral is being received by a healthcare provider, and that gives access to the patient summary at the time of the referral. So we're talking about a referral, maybe it was being generated by a GP on a certain day, and then the referral is received perhaps the next day. And so this introduces the concept of a patient summary that's potentially a snapshot at a point in time. It doesn't go into any detail around how the patient summary is retrieved. So it could be embedded, it could be a link, request for more information. They're the things we would need to work through. Step 3, the referral is being triaged, and the doctor is able to access the patient summary generated at the time of referral, but also the most recent patient summary. And so I feel like this introduces the concept of a current patient summary, an on-demand, I want the patient summary right now. So we've now got a number of different concepts there where we've got a snapshot, a current patient summary. We've got potentially the patient summary being embedded in the referral payload, or perhaps it's a link. So there are a few things that we can work through. The reason these 3 have been highlighted is I feel like they give us a good cross-section of the different priorities that we discussed, so around access and generation, and potentially the current patient summary, which I think was the 3rd one, retrieving the latest. Yeah, that's right. I'll go through the next step. So step 4 is again around access to the patient summary in the referral and the most recent patient summary. So we've got essentially the same info as in step 3. Step 5, however, talks about an update to a patient summary. We indicated that was the lowest priority. So I feel like perhaps that could go out of scope for the moment. Step 6 talks about access to the patient summary in the referral and the most recent patient summary. So that's very similar to step 4, which is also the same as step 3. So those can essentially be combined. And step 7 talks about updating again, which is, we've also said, is our lowest priority. Any questions on that at the moment before I continue on with this consumer journey?
Steve, I was about to type a comment about step 5. As the patient summary is a composition, it would have to it need to conform to the composition / clinical document rules. So therefore, I am not sure that the use of the concept update is accurate. As the clinical document itself has the concept of wholeness and immutable, authenticated, that kind of requirements. Yep. So maybe are you, or is this use case more about sending a new versions of the patient summary rather than updating the existing patient summary?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The reason I said update is because it's in that text there. Now, you raise a really good point. Are patient summaries immutable? Can they be updated? Is a new version created? They're all things that need to be discussed. I think in the amount of time that we have, I mean, we can certainly put it on the list if we want to, talking about that particular topic.
Yeah, that would be good. Yesterday, I didn't raise anything because that was not the forum for that, but I think it probably needs to be sort of unpacked and discussed a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll just make a note about that.
Thank you.
No worries. Kathleen?
Yeah, I've just got one question with regards to, we're talking about a referral at this stage. Has anyone investigated what the referral requirements are for specialists, etc., to be receiving a referral at the moment? Because there's a lot of high criteria that needs to be in a referral. So I'm just trying to work out whether the patient summary is actually needed with the referral creation or the referral received, or it's just when they want more information. Because if they don't send the right information with the referral, it's often just gone. You send it back and that's it. So I think we probably need to understand the referral criterias, and because there's guidelines around different states on what they'll accept, and whether we're sort of edging into a section that maybe it is really, it's not about when the referral's received or the referral's triaged. It might be if they require more information at some point, then that's when they access the patient summary, because I'm pretty sure the referral has to have enough information for that specific condition or whatever they're referring for.
Yeah, good point. So yeah, I think these are good discussions to have around whether it's embedded or whether it's a link. Obviously, as you say, if it's embedded, it needs to conform to a particular quality threshold. So yeah.
No, it's more the fact that I'm saying that the referral itself may have so much information in it. The patient summary should just be something that they access if they require further information. The referral itself will not be accepted unless it has enough information for that referral in the first instance.
Yeah.
So we just don't want to be complicating this too much, I suppose.
Yeah, we are going to be having some vendors doing a demo of how their system works. So, and that's coming up in another slide. We're looking for some more. Yeah, it'll be good to see what their systems are doing. Danielle, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have a question?
Oh, I did. I put it down. I think I was going to the point but I don't really want to give it more airtime talking about update, because I agree that's lowest priority, and let's start with the first bits in this and work through things, and then we can come back to that and unpack things. So
yeah,
I'll leave that.
Okay, no worries. I'm just going to go across the screen. Ruben, I'm not sure who had their hand up first.
I think it was Andy, but
you go, Ruben.
All right. Yeah, look, I think I want to agree with what Kathleen said, but also to come at it from a different angle. We know that some referral document structures, like the one for Miles' record, have things like medications and allergies and so forth. And so there is a question around the overlap in data between what the patient summary is providing and what's in the referral. And I do think that we should discuss that and clarify what that relationship needs to be, even if it's as simple as saying that the information cannot be in conflict with each other. But I think we do need to consider that. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Ruben. Andy?
I guess I'm just note that obviously the referral is a type of request. So I'm a bit concerned about the single dimension. This is kind of like a waterfall model of referrals, whereas the reality is that through FHIR, the opportunity is to actually treat this as a fully fledged workflow, and that engages interaction between collaboration between the referrer and the referee, and that through that information will be negotiated and exchanged. Some will be upfront, some will be dynamically requested, but also from I guess referrers and referees' position, that the value is in really around the transparency of the workflow, and that seems to be left to the side here. I think this is more of a requesting referral issue than a patient summary issue, to be honest. And I'm thinking that this does need this is, I think, needing to be done as an outcome of requesting rather than from a patient summary perspective, because I'm all happy that information is appropriately carried with patient summary for purposes, but I think we need to get the requesting pattern right in this as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll move on to Heath.
I just want to make a comment that I think we shouldn't get too hung up about the specifics around the workflow of referral, and just make sure that we're focusing on the patient summary part of it that might be related to that particular referral or that particular workflow. There's going to be so many workflows, so we need to be a little bit abstract about it. Certainly need to take that into consideration, and I think some of the points that Kathleen was saying is there sufficient information in the patient summary, all those sorts of things, that's all relevant, but somewhat is more the job of the CDG more so than the TDG. We just need to make sure within this group that we've got enough capability to support all the various ways that it might be used, and referral is just one of those use cases. And of course, the complexity of referral, you know, we just don't want to go down that track, otherwise we'll never get anywhere.
Yep. Yeah, this is a really complex consumer journey. So I would really like just for the purpose of the meeting on the day, to narrow this down to either the first 2 or 3 points, and yeah, putting maybe the content of the referral aside for the time being. So if there's any more discussion around that, raise your hand. Otherwise, maybe I'll make a motion that we do that for the purposes of the workshop only.
Could you just say that again? Are you saying number 1, number 2, and number 3 is the focus of the workshop?
Yeah, I think we need to narrow it down, because once we get into 4, or beyond that, we're getting into updates. So we've said that updates are potentially out of scope. So I'd like to narrow it down to either steps 1 and 2 or steps 1, 2, and 3. So step 3 is interesting because it introduces the concept of the current patient summary. Step 2 is the snapshot patient summary.
So the way I look at it, there's really 3 things that we're doing here. One is to create a patient summary at a point in time, retrieving that patient summary at a point in time, retrieving something that's more current.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Whatever that means.
I think all 3 are good things that we can talk about on the day, and that would give us a good way through the access part of patient summary.
Those 3 align to the top 3 priorities, don't they then?
Yes.
The creation, the view, and the looking at a latest. So
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, well then I will motion that we limit the focus of the consumer journey for the workshop to be steps 1, 2, and 3.
Great, thank you, Steve. Do we have anyone that would like to second that motion?
Yeah,
I'll
Danielle, I'm happy to
second.
second. Oh, no. I think Heath beat me.
Okay, Heath has seconded the motion. Therefore, I will launch a poll.
Sorry, Landon. Usually
sorry.
there's any further discussion, but Danielle, just a point of order quickly. Do our rules for motions allow the mover and seconder to be from the same organization?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, no, just checking that. I wasn't sure if we'd actually said something about that. That's all good then.
And I guess it really depends on, because Heath doesn't just work for Spark, if Heath was motioning with a Spark tab or Heath was motioning with a non-Spark tab. I mean, seconding. He didn't motion.
I thought you seconded. Sorry.
No, it's not me. It was Heath.
It was Heath. All right. Well, maybe it just doesn't matter really. I just wanted to find out as going forward. Thank you.
Oh, well, Sanjeet is also happy to second if you would like.
I know, I've got no strong feelings here. I just wanted to check that everything's above board.
Okay.
I don't think that from a decision-making perspective, there is a route to preclude that, but best practice, we might want to avoid that. I think that's 2 different things.
I mean, there is obviously the preponderance of influence thing, which is the overall vote. But in terms of motioning and seconding, I'm not aware of it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that as well. As I said, best practice, we might want to do it. We might not want to do that, but that's not a requirement as far as I know.
Okay. Is there any more discussion points before I launch the poll? Hearing none, I will attempt to relaunch that poll. Okay, I'll give that a few more moments. We're at 58% participation.
And +1 for me, affirmative, Landon.
Thank you. All right, we're at 82%, so I'll count down. 3, 2, 1. I will end the poll now. So sharing the results, we have, including Danielle, 23 affirmative, 0 negative, and 8 abstain. So that motion has passed.
Okay, thanks very much. That'll help narrow down the focus. And it was good that my first motion in this group was controversial. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. Yep. Okay, preparation for the workshop. So this is going to be being sent out next week. A bit of pre-reading. Looks like a lot, but actually there's some links to directly to the pages that we're interested in. So in terms of medication list, the US core medication list, and also how lists are represented in IPS. For the guidance around medications and how they should be represented, there's some interesting guidance in the US core medication request profile. So have a read. There's a few bullet points there that we might talk about. For the IPS structure itself, specifically talking about medications, again, there's a link there directly to the IPS structure page. We've got our own specs, so AECDI, the AU Core FHIR IG, and the Patient Summary Draft FHIR IG. We'll be referring to those throughout the day on how we structure and think about meds in both of the AU Core and Patient Summary. And then for the exchange workshop, there's some interesting operations that we might be able to leverage. So having a bit of background on each of those. So there's the IPS dollar summary operation, and then there's the IPA doc ref operation. These have been mentioned. They were mentioned at the last face-to-face workshop, but there's some reading there about what they are and how they respond, how you make the requests, etc. And then for that consumer journey, the full set of consumer journeys are in that linked document there. And if you can have a look at the referral to specialist and allied health consumer journey 1, that's the one I had on screen. And again, we'll be looking at steps 1, 2, and 3 of that one. And if you're attending, so if you could bring along your use cases at your organisation or in your system for sharing patient medications and any plans or actual implementations, sorry, not implementations per se as in the working environment, but if you've already implemented them, how you've done that in FHIR, and any ideas you have on what we might need to consider for the access and the exchange of patient summaries. So we had a good few comments on the call just earlier. So those would be great to discuss in the group. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we need your help. So I'm looking for any expression of interest. If you can do a presentation on how you are representing meds in your system. So handling those use cases I talked about earlier, and any resources you might have implemented or intend to implement for these use cases. It doesn't need to be very long, 5 to 10 minutes maximum. We've got limited time, so if we get 1 or 2 demos, that'd be awesome. If you can't do a demo, send through maybe a couple of PowerPoints of your workflow, or you could pre-record it like we had at the last face-to-face. And please just drop me an email. My email's there, steve.swinsberg@csiro.au, and I will reach out to you and we'll coordinate next week and tell you what we're looking for. Next slide, please. And similarly, we're looking for an expression of interest on the exchange side of things for the exchange workshop. So a presentation of your system workflow for the referral consumer journey. I already have a volunteer for this one, but another one would be great. We're specifically looking for the interactions between actors. So that'll be the GP, the receiving clinic, the receiving practitioner, potentially the patient if they're involved in viewing their own referral, things like that. Any requests that are happening between systems, so the referral being sent off, if there's any requests back to the originating system for that more information, patient summary. Any data payload for the referral, that was an interesting topic just a moment ago, about whether or not the patient summary is embedded, if there's any standards that you're adhering to, etc. Any access links that might be in the referral, so that would be for accessing the patient summary. If authentication is part of this, or if it's just a, if it's going in the payload, does it need to be authenticated, things like that. Again, 5 to 10 mins max, and yeah, send through a recording if you like, and please email me on that one. And that's all for me for the workshop. So as we said earlier, there's about 100 people registered. I think we've got a few slots left, 19 or 20 slots left. So you can reach out to Eventbrite or Sparked, and we'll get you a ticket. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Landon.
Thanks a lot, Steve. We're actually at time. So Steve just talked to the TDG and CDG day. In Sydney, there's a symposium and connectathon and a hybrid work group meeting. And our next online meetings are on the 7th of March and the 4th of April. Cool. I'll just stop there because we're over time. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot for attending. And thanks for the presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you.